Hi there. You're listening to Unnatural Selection, the show about newsy type stuff and things. My name is George.
My name is Tom.
And my name is Adam.
And with our powers combined, we are Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com. I meant to say, we're not a comedy show about newsy type stuff and things. We're a show about politics and the news that is occasionally sporadically funny.
It's just our new rebranding strategy.
We've rebranded. We've got a whole new brand.
Okay.
There's a new brand. We've gotten rid of the old brand, in with the new brand. We forget the old brand ever happened. Actually, now that we've rebranded, we need to debrand and go back to the old brand. And that's exactly what the coalition has done this week. So it was the coalition, it then became the no-alition, and now we're talking about maybe it is the coalition again. We don't need them. They can get fucked. They can absolutely suck my dick. Wait a minute. We're friends again? All right, it's back on.
Who needs Married at First Sight? Who needs Farmer Wants a Wife?
It's 90 Day Fiancé. It really is.
Live Nats, the relationship debacle of the 20. It is high drama.
I just imagine
I've been here for it every day of this week. I've been watching ABC 24 like a little fucking kid in front of the TV. Just come on, give me another little juicy nugget. What's David Littleproud saying now? What's Michael McCormick going to do in the background? What's happening?
Okay, so for the guy who does those sketches on 7:30 where, they paste in, politicians' heads over popular culture things.
Yeah.
What's that guy's name? He does it's like a specific sketch that they do every so often where it's politicians, but it's The Force Awakens or something like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect opportunity. I'm pitching it right here on the podcast. It's got to be 90 Day Fiancé, David Littleproud, Susan Ley. Susan Ley. I'm not 100% on the pronunciation there.
Yeah.
I've heard it both ways. Susan Ley. Yeah. And it's got to be David Littleproud going, I just don't know if there's chemistry between us. You know what I mean? She's, it's 90 Day Fiancé. And she's going,
what is 90 Day Fiancé?
I just thought he'd have a better job. I just don't understand. I don't know. I've spent 0 seconds of my life watching any of those shows, but I guess advertising sneaks in sometimes. And I just I guess I'm conceptually aware of what all of these shows are, even though I've never spent any minutes of my life watching them.
Yeah. Well, as soon as HBO Max arrived here in Australia, and so Binge suddenly went off, and it's all they have emblazoned on their front page. 90 Day Fiancé, whatever, because they can't show House of the Dragon anymore, or The Last of Us, or White Lotus.
But Binge was just a HBO machine, and now that all the HBO stuff has gone from Binge is the Daily Show.
Yeah.
What else can we?
Oh man,
do you guys want this? What is the rest of what we do if it's not HBO?
Absolutely not the point of anything we're about to talk about, but I noticed the day that Max launched and then I opened up Binge, all the profile images on our account just didn't load. They're all just generic whatever, and they still have not yet come back. It is like Max launching actually broke their app.
Because they were all HBO IP properties. They must have been because we all okay.
You're right.
So what we've done. So what we've just revealed is Tom and I obviously shared up until very recently a Binge account, and we're revealing that on the podcast. And so there must have been the profile images were all from HBO properties, and now that they don't have the IP for those properties anymore, it's just there's no Pedro Pascal that they can put there anymore, right? So
I didn't put that together. Our Selena Meyer icon is, that's Veep, that's HBO. Fuck, oh no.
Yeah.
Okay,
Binge is literally just a 90 Day Fiancé machine now. That's all. That's all that's left on there. Is it's basically become the home of women throwing rosé in each other's faces. Yeah, reality slop. And just wait until the AI slop automates the reality television slop. And you don't even need to get real drunk divorcees to throw rosé in each other's faces anymore. You can just get the AI to do it. What a glorious day that will be.
It sounds sloppy, as it were.
Speaking of sloppy,
90 Day Fiancé.
No, that was worth interrupting me for.
Yeah.
Speaking of sloppy, the coalition. So Adam, tell us what's been going on this week with the coalition the no-alition, and then the remarriaging of the coalition.
So last time on Unnatural Selection, we detailed how Susan Ley had taken over the Liberal Party. Maybe it's a glass cliff, maybe it's not. But she was going in to renegotiate the coalition agreement with the Nationals. She then went into that agreement. And now you can start putting this is if we're doing like a storyboard here. This is where you'd put some really close-ups of David Littleproud's sweaty face.
Okay, and a slow pan. It was meanwhile, back in Canberra, David Littleproud was asking some tough questions of his cabinet. The kind of Nemesis-style documentary. Yeah, 100%. I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah. Look, pretty much what happened was that the Nationals got together and they were like, so David Littleproud obviously won his party room ballot after the election, and they all got together and they said, "Well, we're going to have to go in and negotiate with Susan on this new agreement, and we need to, and the Liberals." Keep in mind, they were saying, we're going to throw everything up for renegotiation. We need to work out, we're going to wait for the review. We're going to have a review and we're going to throw everything out and we're going to review it. We're going to review it so hard. We have to wait for the review before we can comment on anything. Everything's up for negotiation. And then the Nationals were like, we're actually no, we still want to keep
we'd like to keep all of our things, please. Yeah.
And keep all of our things, including nuclear, and we would also like the privilege of not having the shadow ministerial unity. So if you're the shadow minister
quote, the Nationals also wanted the right to vote against coalition policies while retaining shadow cabinet positions, which is less of a coalition and more of a seats with benefits type situation.
Yeah, that sounds more like just being a completely separate party who kind of in principle guarees supply.
Yes.
So the Greens.
It's more of a
the crossbench.
Yeah, it's more of a situationship, if you will, rather than a coalition.
A situationship, you say?
Yeah, I was very proud of that.
Good.
Yeah.
I like that one.
Oh, you're proud of that, but 90-day fiancé IE can get fuck.
That's kind of more of a written joke. It doesn't really translate to the spoken word all that well.
I think I nailed it, to be honest. But all right, fair enough.
That's okay.
Well, we love you, Tom, and we love your contributions.
Agree to disagree. So this Susan Ley obviously wanted full review of policies, including nuclear, because obviously one of the things they got shellacked on at the last election was nuclear, and everyone's overwhelming objection to it.
Woeful policy.
Yeah, if you can call it a policy, is $300 billion in off-budget spending, but it's not spending, but we're not going to get any of it back, but it's still money that's going out, but it's not costed. The whole thing was completely fucking weird and dog shit. All of the 7 communities where the nuclear plants were proposed, all but one of them had massive swings against the coalition. Now, maybe that's not saying that's that much but more or less everywhere had massive swings against the coalition in this last election cycle. But clearly this was a policy that, especially in the places where it was proposed, was incredibly unpopular. You think wind farms are unpopular? Wait till they see a fucking Homer Simpson style nuclear reactor in their backyard. Okay, right? So they wanted to keep all of that. And it kind of makes sense from an analysis standpoint why. Because the Nationals didn't do that badly this last election cycle. They lost 1 seat. It kind of wasn't a big deal. They run up massive majorities in the seats that they have. There's no one really competing for, 15 rural seats all over Australia, right? It doesn't make sense.
There are some independents that go up against them that I know kept them kind of nipped at their heels. But
it's all very conservative, right? Labor's not going after them because it's like heartland. So you might get independent versus Nationals in some seats. And because obviously the Liberals up until the last week were in coalition with them, they had an agreement where one party was dominant in a seat, the other party in the coalition wouldn't compete against them for that seat. Now,
why would you run Libs and Nats against each
other? It doesn't make sense to compete for the Conservative vote, right? You just potentially split it. So, they had a pretty good thing going, and the Nationals kind of thought, well, it seems like we've got a lot of power in this negotiation. We need them more than they need us right now.
They would have.
We're losing nothing. They've lost an arm and a leg. And, like a whole minibus worth of Liberal members just took the fuck out in the last election cycle. So clearly, they need us more than we need them. So we're in a position to really push our agenda and negotiate. Susan Ley saw their list of demands. There was some sort of rural fund that was worth $20 billion. There was the ability to break up the supermarkets, which I'm not in favor of. I think the supermarkets sector could use a good deal more competition in Australia. But basically, they saw that and they said, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. We, the Nationals, are going to go do our own thing, and you guys can be the opposition, and we'll just hang out over here until.
And then they left the door open, so it was like, we're not, this is just a temporary, we're just giving each other space. Was kind of the way they were framing it. Control separation.
Yeah.
Yeah, then, I'm dumping you, but we're on a break.
Yeah. I'm dumping you, but I will be incredibly upset if I find out you fuck someone else.
And so that was Tuesday, right?
Yeah. Fuck, that was only Tuesday?
That was only Tuesday. Now, there's been lots of floods in New South Wales, and Barnaby Joyce is off, in his seats, trying to help out with that kind of thing. But obviously, the news has then filtered down to Barnaby and, well, I'm assuming Barnaby, but several, let's say, prominent members of the Nationals realised, I think, that they were going to take a pretty massive pay cut.
Yeah, well, this is exactly what I said in my article. So I wrote about this in my Substack. Yeah. I think a bunch of, because if you're no longer the opposition, so the opposition is the second largest party in power. If you, the Nationals, decide to split up this coalition agreement, you're no longer part of the opposition, right? You're just another minor party floating around like the Greens or the Teals or whomever, or, the Palmer United Party, Trumpeter Patriots, minor party, not Trumpeter, whatever it's called now. Pauline Hanson's One Nation with Pauline Hanson, that sort of thing. So if you're no longer the opposition, there's a swathe of a raft of different benefits that you now no longer qualify for. If you're a shadow cabinet minister, you get an extra $60,000 a year. You get a bunch of additional staff members. You get additional resources and I'm sure travel allowances and other things as well that you would be entitled to as a shadow cabinet minister. Well, if
not to mention briefings and that kind of thing as well, and information. Yeah.
If you're no longer part of the shadow, if you're no longer part of the opposition, you're more or less out of the loop. The Nationals would more or less become completely irrelevant as a political entity with 15 seats in the lower house if this divorce actually stuck. So my analysis in the article is basically this has got to be some sort of negotiating tactic from David Littleproud to say, oh, we're happy to walk away from the table with nothing and good luck you guys ever forming government again until you turn around and give us what we want, right? So that's what there seems like now they're back in the room and they're negotiating and they're open to a deal, which means presumably the Liberals have to capitulate and then adopt all of the policies that they just got thoroughly rejected for at the last election, nuclear being amongst them. It doesn't quite make sense to me. But
what was the term, Tom? It was
they'd in principle agreed to the 4 policy demands. I know nuclear was the big one everyone was talking about.
So a regional fund,
supermarkets,
divestiture of the supermarkets, and there was another one, and I can't remember what it is. Now, I actually don't mind the whole regional fund either. I think that's not necessarily a bad idea.
Yeah, we can have some money for for regions.
But it's funny because 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was like, where did this nuclear and I've been wondering it for months. Where did the nuclear policy come from? Who thought this up? Was this just a Liberal think tank? Maybe it wasn't actually a Liberal idea in the first place. It was a Nationals idea.
Yeah, possibly.
And it never occurred to me that is potentially the origin of this whole cavalcade of shit.
It was definitely so the 4th pillar was the telecommunications universal service obligation, which is basically the idea that you need to supply regional and rural areas with the same kind of quality of services.
Not necessarily a bad.
It's probably ludicrously expensive for what we get for it because Australia is real big and there's lots of places in Australia that are real small and would be expensive to service. But let's put all of that aside. I'm certain that the nuclear stuff was definitely getting pushed by the Nats, but it was also getting pushed by a bunch of special interest groups that were pressuring the coalition as a whole. It was very popular, I'm sure, with Gina Reinhardt and all the these think tanks and all these groups that were funding and donating into the coalition right before the election. So there were a lot of people that were invested very much in this idea of nuclear, and nuclear being a way of we all agree that climate change is a bit overblown. What can we do to kind of pump the brakes on a full renewable energy transition? What's a way that we can differentiate ourselves to some degree from Labor's plan of fully renewables, based architecture? Nuclear kind of differentiates us, and it kind of gives a hedge to the climate deniers to be like, oh, we're just, we still need stable baseload power. We're just looking after the stability of the
Pragmatism.
grid. I'm just being pragmatic. I'm not a climate denier, because I still think we need clean energy. It has to be nuclear energy for some reason. And obviously the advantage being you plonk those nuclear reactors exactly where the coal stations were. And so the idea being that you would appeal to those same communities, saying you're not going to lose all your jobs once coal goes out. We can still retain our political power. It was an idea that, despite it being like a Peter Dutton brain fart on the trail, ended up kind of appealing to a bunch of different elements of the different constituencies within the coalition. And so that's why it got adopted. I think the problem is now, though, is that it's kind of stuck with the Nationals. They've gone, yeah, actually, we really like this. This enables us to be climate deniers with a straight face. Let's we're 100% in on nuclear. And the rest of the coalition's like, oh, we just got fucking bollocked for this. So maybe let's not, we never really believed in any of this stuff anyway. Yeah. So,
and there's several. Oh, sorry, you had.
Well, no, I was going to say my favorite thing sort of about all this and this policy back and forth of what they should and shouldn't be sticking to their guns over has brought out one of my favorite political commentators of the modern era, which is messy bitch Malcolm Turnbull.
Oh, messy bitch.
When messy bitch Turnbull turns up, it's a good time.
Messy Malcolm.
Yeah, because he spoke to insiders during the week. I think it must be on their podcast because I know Insiders is the Sunday show or whatever. But speaking to the ABC, where he said in his classic, the holier than thou kind of cadence, saying that policies are academic interest only until such time as we get close to an election. So this is a fight about nothing. They've done an enormous harm for no purpose at all, the Nationals, by blowing it up in this way. It's really, really unwise and stupid politically. He just went them.
Yes, but I mean, as we mentioned, energy policy in Australia is the third, fourth, and fifth rail of Australian politics, right? That is why Malcolm Turnbull got knifed, was because of this internal kind of... Two times over Australian energy policy and the reluctance from the Nationals to embrace renewables as a sensible, sort of direction to go in. So, obviously he's got a bit of an axe to grind.
Yes, and
against the coalition for that, right? So
he describes if Susan Ley goes along with it as another case of the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, well, but that's exactly what we've seen. So I'd be interested to see. So they've got in principle support. Does that mean that the Liberal Party has capitulated on all four of these negotiating points? Because if they've just said, "Oh, we've got a difference of policy opinion as to where we should go on these four issues," and then the Nats say we're going to take our bag and walk, and then the Libs say, "Actually, forget about that change of heart. We're going to go back to what our heart was a week ago and re-agree with you on all of these four things." That's going to show how weak the party is if that is the case. Right?
I think strategically it's just a case of kicking the can down the road. They know that they don't actually have to have any proper policies for the next year.
Yeah, or the next 3 years if you're Peter Dutton. Just go to the election and just figure it out on vibes.
They know that they can, if they can have a. I mean, this is the thing. They're still negotiating whether they will actually a new coalition agreement. So whether or not they actually get to that agreement stage, I don't know. They're basically back in the room. They're at mediation. If this is the relationship analogy, they're at mediation at the moment, having a chat about who gets what and how that would work.
But see, the thing is, these negotiations, they're generally just a formality with the coalition. After an election cycle, there's an obligatory leadership spill, at least for the Nats. I don't know about the Liberal Party. And then what they do is they form this coalition agreement. Here's how we're going to work together for the next 3-year period. But that agreement is really just kind of a formality. They're just talking about who gets what on the crossbench. Oh, we want to have this, this shadow ministry. We want to have, trying to jockeying for place within the coalition. It's never ever, as far as I'm aware, recently, in any case, been an ideological difference, overcoming a separation of ideology. It's more about like who gets what when we divvy up the pie, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there's been like 3 instances in the past where they've kind of, separated and gotten back together again. But like, as I mentioned, the maths, if the maths was difficult for the coalition before with a 50-seat differential to the Labour Party, like imagine if it's just the Liberals by themselves with 28 seats versus Labor's 93. Like it would be a mathematical impossibility for them to form government within 1 3-year cycle. Like it would just take too much of a Liberal Party by themselves gain.
A lot of Gina Reinhardt money and a lot of...
Mate, there's no amount of Gina Reinhardt money in the world that could overcome a 50-seat differential in one election. Sorry, it's currently 50 seats. If the Liberals were alone, it's like a 70-seat, a 65-seat differential.
Yeah,
right?
Something crazy.
So the coalition, in order to have any kind of relevance whatsoever in the next cycle of Parliament, needs to be together. Needs to be a coalition. Otherwise, there's just a couple of minor parties nobody gives a fuck about.
Friend of the show, Luke, who you guys will be familiar with, he often said to me years ago that to the Nationals, if the Nationals were smart, they'd form a coalition with the Greens. Because...
Okay.
Because...
Hear him out.
All right.
The Nationals are, by their nature, conservative in terms of like protecting regional sort of areas, and that actually lends itself to certain areas
yes.
of Greens policy in terms of like protecting the environment. Now, and the whole thing of like making sure farmers and the environment are all looked after, protecting regional heritage, all that kind of shit.
Looking after the Murray-Darling Basin, that sort of thing.
Yeah. But there's a linkage there, right? Unfortunately, the Nationals, and this is where the whole thing falls down. The Nationals are also they use coal for lubricant, in their activities. So that doesn't work. But in theory, if Matt Canavan was to like just quit and maybe a few other people just to go on their merry way, maybe in the future that could be a possibility.
There are some. Okay. No, that's dumb. So there's. So I hear what you're saying about there being some elements of a conservation agenda that overlap between the Greens and the Nationals with regards to like farming and rural communities and agricultural practices maybe. But I think the reason the Nationals get out of bed in the morning is to like hump coal. They are, so it really doesn't comport with the whole the Greens agenda to like save the coal is both the lubricant and the object of their affection.
Right.
So the whole point, like the Nationals are inherently a hyper conservative party. Like a lot of as we've talked about over the last 10, 20 years, the dog shit hyper conservative stuff that we've seen from the coalition has been from the pressure from the Nationals, right? In terms of specifically energy policy and, dealing with climate change and all that sort of stuff. That's why Matt Canavan does his like coal miner cosplay on Twitter, where he's all lubed up with coal dust. Like, I'm a fucking man of the people, says me on 260 grand a year from the taxpayer living in, my cushy existence in the ACT. Like it's the whole thing is completely fucking ridiculous. But like, it's, there is in terms of the Venn diagram, let's put it this way, of the things that the Greens and the Nationals like agree on, you might have like something to do with rivers, like they just like kiss. They just slightly touch right at the center, those two Venn diagrams, and everything else they're on completely fucking opposite ends of the spectrum on. The Nationals get up in the morning to like kick poor people in the face. And they're not even good at the conservative shit that they purport to be good at. They say that they're for the farmers, they're for rural communities and all that, but they're happy to sell them down the river like Barnaby Joyce did with the Murray-Darling Basin program. The way that whole situation was completely mismanaged, was really, at the behest of the Nationals. The Liberals kind of go along with it because it's like, we don't really give a shit what happens out in the communities. If it gets us the votes, we'll agree to whatever you guys want to do. But the Nationals are also like bad at looking after rural communities as well. They're actually not good at it. Anyway, so that was a dumb theory, Luke. I'm sorry.
I'll link him the episode.
Yeah, just clip that out and just go, Luke, I love you, buddy, but that's fucking dumb as rocks. Labour MP Ed Husic has criticised Anthony Albanese's government over its response to Israel blocking aid in Gaza. So you might remember that we were talking about there was a bit of a cabinet reshuffle after Labour's election victory on the 3rd. Was it the 3rd? Yes, I think so.
Yeah, the 3rd.
And part of that reshuffle was Labour Minister Ed Husic being taken off the front bench along with Josh Frydenberg. Not Josh Frydenberg. Sorry, not Josh Frydenberg. Dreyfus. Mark Dreyfus. Richard Dreyfus is an actor.
Yeah.
So there were a couple of front benches that were sort of unceremoniously dumped from the sort of leftist faction, and a bunch of people coming in from the sort of centre, the sort of kind of more right leaning faction of the Labour Party under Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles.
Yeah.
And sort of his guys coming in and sort of filling some of those gaps. Now, I think Ed Husic was kind of dumped by his own faction, which is interesting, as a result of his stance on Gaza. Basically, he's been one of the only outspoken voices in the Labour Party saying that the government needs to do more with respect to its position on Gaza, saying that, we should have been taking... He wrote an opinion piece for The Guardian recently saying that his dumping from the front bench was basically due to his stance on Gaza, where he said that Australia should have joined countries like UK, France and Canada in threatening sanctions if aid flows to Gaza are not resumed. So whilst Australia joined, Foreign Minister Penny Wong this week issued a joint statement along with officials from 23 other countries calling for a, quote, full and immediate resumption of aid to Gaza, unquote, and labelling reports that 14,000 babies were at risk of dying as horrifying. So there was a whole story about those numbers and what those numbers mean. I think it was misinterpreted in the media, saying like 14,000 babies are going to die this weekend if we don't get food in, which is not quite what the report was saying. It was saying that there's hundreds of thousands of people at risk of malnutrition as a result of aid not getting in. If we don't act on that now, then 14,000 of those people could be severely malnourished as a result, with potentially people dying, right?
If you've seen some of the imagery, it's pretty distressing.
It's horrifying. Not to detract from the horror that's going on in Gaza. I just want to clarify because there was a lot of kind of confused reporting about that 14,000 number.
And look, Israel sort of buckled to international pressure and they've let some supplies in, but it's not a full.
We're talking about like single numbers of trucks a day. It's not like, I remember hearing the number quoted that the number of trucks would need to be in the dozens per day in order to sufficiently,
more than that, probably.
Dozens or hundreds perhaps per day. It's several orders of magnitude larger than what's currently getting in order to actually facilitate the humanitarian needs of the people that's going on there, right?
So UK, France, and those countries have they've said, well, we'll actually sanction you, and then what? I mean, I don't want to get too out of scope here, but there was obviously that sort of terrorist incident, or what are you going to call it, in the United States, outside the Jewish museum, I think it was.
The two Jewish people that were shot, and killed.
So there was a member of the Israeli government who basically said that incident is because of the UK, France's position around Gaza, and was drawing a direct parallel between the two, which is
that's
mind-boggling.
It's not the fact that we're conducting, human rights violations, committing war crimes, and continuing to do so for, over a year and a half now. It's not the fact that we're doing something that's terrible and horrendous and immensely globally unpopular. It's the fact that people are calling us on it. That's making people, hate us. It's just like, and also the conflation of Jewish people and the Jewish state is like a deliberate kind of thing that
the Israeli state, you mean?
Yeah. The idea that any kind of criticism of the Israeli state and what they're doing is inherently anti-Semitic. and sort of conflating those two things deliberately in order to, to sort
That's
of
been their biggest
try and win the
playbook.
messaging war. But but it's such obvious horseshit. Like, obviously anti-Semitism is real, exists, and it does exist. It is terrible. And you do see some of the pushback to this whole situation in Gaza. Yeah, that is, frankly, yes, anti-Semitic. But that doesn't, one thing doesn't negate the other. Just because there is anti-Semitism out there doesn't mean Israel's not in the wrong for conducting this illegal, borderline genocidal campaign in Gaza. And many human rights organizations have said that there is evidence there to say that, yes, it could be plausible that, a genocide is occurring. I'm so reluctant to use the word genocide because I understand it's got a legalistic, it's a term of art. It means a specific thing, and I don't know if those legal terms have been met. But we can all agree, 50,000 people dead in Gaza. At best, what Israel is doing there is indiscriminate. At worst, it is for sure human rights crimes, crimes against humanity.
It's against the rules of law.
Against the rules of law.
Of war, sorry.
There are rules. And just because your country's been attacked, and it was terrible that Israel was attacked on October 7th, just because your country was attacked doesn't mean you get to yippee-ki-yay motherfucker across the entire Middle East and just do whatever the fuck you want. You're not John McClane. You can't just start fucking shooting anyone that you come across, right? It's not how it's still, there are still laws as to how wars and conflicts are supposed to be waged. And by not adhering to that, you are turning the global community against you. The whole reason, there was documentation that emerged recently that talked about the timeline and the thinking, and we sort of knew this at the time, it was reported out a little bit, but the idea was, from Hamas's perspective, is that they saw that Israel and Saudi Arabia were normalizing relationships, relations between the two countries, and kind of wanting to put some of this animus to bed. And basically Hamas at that stage said, okay, we're going to engineer this conflict. We're going to kill as many people as we can. Israel's going to overreact and, attack us, and it's going to turn the Muslim world away from them in terms of this normalization. And that's exactly what happened. You could argue whether Hamas got exactly what they wanted because, there's been this ongoing campaign of, whatever it is, 18 months now where all of these people are getting killed. But the chief goal that they had from the October 7th attacks to turn Israel away from the greater, Islamic Middle East, that succeeded. They gave them exactly what they wanted by allowing themselves, like America in 9/11, to get drawn into this fucking forever war based on a reactionary kind of response.
At the cost of their own destruction, which was improbable given the scale of what they did. I still think it was a complete strategic failure by
and I'm sure that a lot of Hamas fighters and a lot of their infrastructure and their ability to mount a credible kind of physical defense now has been severely weakened. I don't think there's any doubt of that. Hamas as an organization is more or less crippled, but they succeeded in their goal, which was to draw the Israeli government into overreacting because that's exactly what they did.
There was an interesting article. It was on Planet America on the ABC. They had a panelist on. I can't remember the chap's name, but one of the things he said was that even if Hamas as an organization disappears, the concept that you would have somehow peace in place of that with what Israel is doing is fanciful because at the end of the day, the people you are bombing and
are your neighbors. They're still going to be there tomorrow. You can't unless you ethnically cleanse them and then get rid of them and move them all into Jordan, or you genocide them and kill them all so there's none of them left. They're still going to be your neighbors when all of this is over. So how is that going to fucking work from a peace and security perspective? You can't kill an idea, right? And if the idea is you fucking killed my whole family and I'm going to be really mad at you now for the rest of my life because obviously, then whether you call it Hamas or whether you call it fucking something else, the animus is still going to be there. Bloodshed does not create peace. That's just not how it works.
The equation or the way that this panelist person they're interviewing sort of equated it. He's like, the Palestinian people won't disappear, but it'll be kind of similar to what Australians did to their Indigenous population, or the British did to the Indigenous population here in Australia, and what the Americans did to their Native American population. Whereas it's kind of they get colonized effectively, which is what Trump has also suggested about Gaza, right?
To make it the Riviera of the Middle East, yeah.
So we're not saying that we won't.
The West Bank is like now.
Similar, yeah. It's like it becomes, the Palestinian people are still there, like the genealogy is still there, but
they just live in an apartheid state where they don't have the same rights. Yeah.
Well, yeah, or they.
You can have democracy. You can have, you can have an Israeli state. You can have a Jewish state. But you can't have all three of those. If you're going to have this expansive state that includes all of Palestine and it's occupied and, ruled by Israel, well, then you're not a democracy anymore, because you've got all these people in this apartheid state that are second-class citizens that don't have the right to vote. So, or you expand and you include all of these not Jews into your state, and then you don't have your ethno-state anymore, because... Now, you know what I mean? Like, if the identity of Israel as a Jewish, democratic, secure, discrete country on its own, like, it doesn't work if any of these plans that they seem to have come to fruition. If they have to occupy Gaza, or if they have to, it doesn't work. You're going to change the character of your country if you, take over and occupy Gaza and basically run an apartheid state within a state. Like, it's just not, the whole thing is just like, again, like 9/11, there just is no day after game plan. And this is something that we've said all along. There is no day after plan. It's just a grievance-led policy of ideological animus. And that's why you see your Smotrich and all these fucking guys still going out there, even just days ago, and talking about ethnic cleansing and starving them out. And the last 2 months have been the absolute worst in terms of, them going out of their way to deliberately starve out the population of Gaza. Like, it's horrifying what they're doing. And they're talking about it as though it's like, like it's an ethnic cleansing still. And so I don't know why the media is so reluctant to report on it as it is. Like, there are some places
starting
like
to
the Guardian, if even countries like the UK and France can get on board with sanctions, that's how you know, because these neoliberals don't want to sanction. They want the money to keep flowing. That's all they want. That's all Macron wants. He's just sitting there going, I just want the fucking money to keep. Like, why are you guys fucking all of this up? Why are you making me sanction to get so, human rightsy violaty that even Emmanuel Macron, who's probably selling you a bunch of those missiles, has to go, all right, we need to sanction you. You're really getting out of order. Like, that just shows how far off the political, the acceptable spectrum that the Israeli government has gone over this conflict. It just seems, I don't know what to call it, except like genocidal. The intent seems to be to want to murder everyone. Well, I don't know what you do. Like,
I mean,
how do you negotiate with that? How do you come to a peace with that? It just doesn't.
Yeah, the most recent, like, I forget which territory it is in Gaza, but yeah, that Israel's already saying, like, evacuate this spot, which is like the last refuge spot.
Yeah,
because we're gonna have I believe, quote, unprecedented action there, when it sounds like it's pretty freaking precedented from everything they've done to everywhere else in Gaza. But I think back to what Ed Husic in the Labour Party said, I think, like, everything from what you guys just summarized, I think makes his point even stronger. That because he said that, that the UK, France, and Canada have said what they, have stressed that they would sanction, or that they will push sanctions on this. And that he said, quote, Australia could have proudly joined them and we didn't. And he's absolutely right, because in this article on the ABC that we have here, they reached out to the government and they have some quotes from, like, who they just attribute to a government spokesperson. rattling off some stuff of how they've been consistently opposed to expansion of military operations by Israel in Gaza and clear that the forced displacement of Palestinians breaches international law, and saying that we've made clear to the Israeli government that this suffering cannot continue. And I think I'm with Ed Husic there in that okay, great. You've made it clear, have you? Well, the suffering has been continuing.
It's
what
been
are you
continuing.
Do about it?
Yeah, exactly.
You've been constantly clear that it's bad. Penny Wong has been waving her finger, just wagging it at them for 18 months
with
now.
increasing levels of concern. Yes.
This is really bad. This is concerning. This cannot continue. This cannot continue. This cannot continue. She said every day for a year and a half. And so what are you going to fucking do about it, Penny? Christ.
I mean, to be fair, I don't. Sanctions by Australia won't do anything to really hurt.
Yeah, but any individual nation says, what can I do? I'm just Burkina Faso. What can I do? If everyone gets together and sanctions them, then they won't be able to carry on this campaign of wanton violence. If all of the other nations get together and do and that is meaningful pressure for the UK, France, and what was the other one?
Canada.
Canada, some of the largest economies in the world, okay, behind, the United States and others. Some of the largest economies in the world say they're going to sanction you. That is meaningful, okay?
Yeah.
You can't just go,
stop them, but we can
Australia's only 2% of global warming emissions. What should we do? We're just a tiny little island worth of people. We shouldn't do anything. It's America and China that are making all the emissions. Let's do nothing instead. It's a logical fallacy. For anyone who wants to have a listen to a great podcast episode which talks about how the media is treating Gaza and the ways that it tends to deprioritize Palestinian voices in favor of Israeli voices, I would recommend the Lamestream Media podcast. It's a new Australian political podcast that's started with Osman Faruqi and Scott. I forget his last name, whose name escapes me at the moment. But I've been massively enjoying it. They did a great episode on this called Australia's Woeful Gaza Reporting on the 8th of May, which talks about, it goes through an ABC article and goes, hey, the first quote is from an Israeli minister. The second quote is from Benjamin Netanyahu. The third quote is from an Israeli NGO. The fourth quote, and it literally breaks an article down piece by piece and goes, hey, have you noticed how nowhere in this fucking article are we talking about a Palestinian voice talking about their experience and what it's been like there? The media has been complicit in backing up all of, these various governments' perspectives. And who knows exactly why that is. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they just don't want to toe the line or for whatever reason. But
to be fair, there's been 300 journalists or something like that. Hundreds of journalists have been killed in Gaza. It's very hard to get reporters in there on the ground.
Yeah, but that's not the issue. It's about the prioritization of Palestinian voices. There are Australians in Australian newsrooms that are representing the Israeli perspective and not representing the Palestinian perspective. And we've talked about this before on the podcast where it's very active language when there's a Hamas retaliation that's violent. Hamas bombs, or versus when Israel undertakes an air attack, it's X amount of Palestinians die in an air attack. It's very passive language versus very active language, depending on the party that's doing it. And these are recognizable patterns that we're seeing recurring over and over and over again in Australian media and other media. And I think it serves that kind of, that the media and the Labor Party and certainly the Liberal Party have kind of, they're sort of hand in glove with a lot of the way they speak about and discuss the situation in Gaza. And it's very pro-Israeli, right?
I think if you go to SBS World News, they're fairly pro-Palestinian, I would suggest.
Oh, you found the one channel that goes to 2% of Australians? Oh, yeah, that's more representative of what's actually going on.
SBS is a bloody good news
I'm not saying you can't, but sure, you can find stuff on Al Jazeera. You can find stuff on, if you go to independent news sources like Zeteo and things like that, you can find, perspectives that prioritize Palestinian voices more. But what you're not seeing that is in the mainstream where most of Australian consumers consume their news, and it happens to just so coincide exactly with the government of the day's political perspective, their policy position on the Gaza conflict, right? So
are people still watching Karl Stefanovic? Like, is that
someone
a
is.
thing on
He
breakfast?
gets
They
paid
must
heaps.
be.
Kyle and Jackie O just got like a 10-year, $200 million deal.
What?
Yeah.
Something fun.
Yeah.
Hey, Karl Stefanovic makes great TV, but yeah, people are watching. People are watching it. It's not good news, but
No, it's terrible.
great
It's
TV.
all dross. But like the point is like, yeah, that's the audience capture is there. Obviously, you've got Abby Chatfield and all this new media sort of coming online lately.
Oh yeah.
But that's still a minority of the, where people get their news from. A lot of people tune on to the 7:30 report and hear, a journalist holding, like it is still that very traditional kind of media approach here, at least in Australia. So,
But with Ed Husic, it's interesting because obviously he's been dumped from the front bench, so he's able to write an op-ed. But when it comes to voting, he'll still have to tie the party line unless he wants to
go the way
ship.
of Fatima Payment, yeah.
Yeah. But we will see.
It's sad. I just, like, you think that Labor would be emboldened by their thumping majority to have a little bit more faith in themselves and be a little bit more progressive on some of these issues, to go, okay, we've got a mandate. We've got the Australian public is with us. We can afford to be a little bit brave. We've got a 50-seat lead over our next closest competitor who is currently infighting and breaking up and getting back together. Maybe we've got a mandate and we can afford to be a little more adventurous with some of these positions. But at the end of the day, I think it is what they really think. They really are just kind of neoliberal shills. And that is kind of what they're kind of centrists at heart. That's just what they believe in.
Yeah.
Right?
See, I see it as sort of the opposite. It's more like not so much that their thumping of the Liberal Party gave them a mandate to be more progressive. It was more the thumping they gave to the Liberal Party to be like, great, everyone's seen how we've been thus far, and they like
and
it.
they're happy with it. Let's be
we
even
don't need
more.
to be any more progressive because we won so hard.
Yes.
What we're doing right now,
right.
what we've been doing
Is
is
great,
exactly
and
what
everyone
people
loves it.
voted for.
Yeah.
No changes.
Yeah.
Which
That'll be
Hypercentrism.
Definitely for the next at least the next year or two. Maybe leading into year 3, they might start to do something a bit more fun, but I don't know, we'll see.
It depends how the whole LibNats thing turns out, kind of, that we were talking about before as well, as to if they get any traction or if the Greens get any traction or something, right? Like, they have to be scared at the next election to want to change their policies. Or
it'll depend on what's happening in the world and, how the economy's going and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of the economy, the US keeps trying to blow its own economy up, but somehow I guess money keeps flowing. It's like the bond market freaking out. Tell us about the big beautiful bill, George, and why we should care.
So,
yeah, why should I care? I understand that I should, based on everything that's going on. They're like, every headline I've seen about this is like Donald Trump's proposed policy is scaring investors, and that means bad for every Australian. I'm like, okay, so clearly I should care. Why? What's happening?
So I mean, there's a couple of different things. Let's get the NBA bill out. So there's a couple of things happening in markets at the moment. So there was a bit of a recovery after Trump announced that he was backing off the Chinese tariffs, right? So they went from 145% down to 30%. And they came up with a sort of a negotiated solution to this trade stoush. And the markets rejoiced and they said, oh, happy days. Oh, it's come down from 145% to 30. 30 is a much lower number than 145%. Hooray, share price go up. And the market responded kind of ebulliently, bullishly, some might say, to the news that the tariffs had been lowered. Now, the problem is that a 30% tariff on Chinese goods is still debilitating for the American economy because all of the stuff comes from China, and it's going to equate to a roughly 30% level inflation on most goods, because most goods are made in China, or have component parts that are made in China and aren't made in the United States. So I think what the markets are starting to come to grips with and starting to realize, and it's now starting to flow through and be priced in American share prices, is that like this is kind of just going to be the permanent state of being now. And if you actually factor that 30% in, it doesn't look that good. You know, there was an article on Bloomberg where they talked about, you know, speaking to a business owner who sells I think it's like fake Christmas trees that are made in China. And they said, okay, but like in this big, beautiful bill, one of the things that's in there is that Trump's going to lower your tax rate. So maybe that'll offset some of the extra costs that you would have from the tariffs at 30%. And he's like, yeah, so tariffs increasing by 2% would basically wipe out that differential. Like the amount of extra costs that I have from the tariffs is like 15 times higher than the amount that I would save on taxes.
You're not getting a 30% tax reduction.
You're not getting a 30% tax reduction, right, to offset it. So I think for a lot of businesses which are reliant on Chinese imports, which is for businesses that sell products, most businesses, they're still looking down the barrel of these 30% tariffs and thinking, oh, fuck, this still doesn't really work for us.
China makes everything. Oh, fuck.
China makes more or less everything, and to do the same things and do them in America is not really feasible.
Just see that Trump called Tim Cook or spoke to Tim Cook and was like, gave him an ultimatum. He's like, bro, you have to make the iPhones in America.
Yeah, every iPhone sold in America has to have been made here or else.
Yeah, and Tim Apple said, God, gosh, Jilly Winkers, Donald, I don't actually think that's humanly possible because we haven't got any of the supply chains or expertise or any of the knowledge or any of the, the factories or any of the component parts to build the factories. All of that shit comes from China. So that's literally never going to happen.
And if it did, an iPhone would cost like $6,000.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of the reality of what that means is starting to come through, and you're starting to see that priced into American shares, which have been dropping again of late. You're also starting to see what's called the Sell America trade, where myself and other foreign what's the word? Retail investors. Retail investors, just not institutions, just regular people with money in the market, have basically pulled out of all American, not just shares, but also other kinds of financial instruments as well, like bonds and other things like that, because they just don't see America as a safe place to do business anymore with, the orange Cheeto in chief running things, right? So basically what you're seeing is massive outflows of capital from not just shares, but bonds and all other kinds of financial instruments out of America. A capital flight, basically, is what you're seeing. You're seeing all this money come out and not a lot of money coming in to replace it. The Congressional Budget Office has assessed this big, beautiful bill, which is a whole raft of dog shit measures, which we'll talk about in a sec. Basically, it's going to add trillions and trillions of dollars to the US's deficit. And recently, I think it was one of the ratings agencies, Moody's, downgraded America as a place to do business from AAA to AA. And I think that means all of the three major rating agencies have now downgraded America as a place in which to do business. And that makes it more expensive when America tries to raise debt to fund all of this deficit spending that they're doing in the form of bonds. That means that the rates that they spend, how much they have to pay you in order to offset the risk of you lending your money to America is higher, right? The money I lend to America, I know that's much safer than, say, money I would lend to Venezuela because their economy's in the shit. So the money I get from America, right, in terms of bonds, is much less because the risk I'm assuming is much less. As their credit rating gets downgraded, the amount that they have to pay in order to get people to buy their debt increases, which means their interest rates go up, which means, interest rates domestically go up. The amount that American consumers will pay, those interest rates flow through to the rest of the economy. The amount that the American government has to pay in interest increases as well. And it's already incredibly high because of interest rates, trying to combat inflation and all that sort of stuff. So the amount that I heard this recently, the amount the American economy, the American government pays in interest repayments is now larger than their largest expense, I think, which is the military. Like that's how much money, billions and billions of dollars every year that the American government is paying in maintaining their debt obligations, right? And it's a huge drag on the American economy because that means in order to invest additional money into the economy or do tax cuts or whatever it is you're going to do, you can't spend that money because that money's deployed elsewhere in making interest repayments. Now, Donald Trump has been talked about forcibly getting other countries like Europe to like restructure their debt and say, hey, actually, you're going to give us a lot more time to repay this debt back to you, and we're going to do it at lower rates. And they're obviously reluctant to do that and try and force some kind of currency manipulation situation like they did with Japan in the 80s, where they said, hey, your car industry is too successful. Like, we're going to force you to basically, wreck your currency in order to make American cars more competitive domestically, right? Make Japanese cars more expensive against American cars. To the extent to which the Japanese, economy really didn't recover until like the mid 2000s as a result of that action. So America's trying to do that now with Europe, is trying to go and bully all of their allies all across the world and try and get them to degrade their currencies in order to make American exports more attractive. And it's just not like it's not a policy that's going to A, do much, or B, work. So there's a lot of things going on. There's also like the chance of a recession has also increased. Like different agencies are rating it somewhere close to 60% this year, chance of falling into recession. And obviously that's a big bundle of shit for everyone, right? People lose their jobs, tax revenue goes down, the amount of expenditure goes up as people get on welfare programs and SNAP and food stamps and all that sort of stuff.
Well, this is the key thing, right? Is that well, not the key thing, but one of the impacts of this bill is that food stamp programs, certain welfare payments, Medicaid.
Yeah, basically
they're all cuts to these services.
You know how Robin Hood stole from the rich to give to the needy? What if it was the opposite?
Yeah.
And that's the big, beautiful bill. So essentially,
gotta love a reverse Robin Hood.
It's a reverse Robin Hood. We're stealing from the poor to give to the rich. So they expect to cut Medicare by an estimated $500 billion over the next 10 years, meaning that roughly 8.6 million Americans will lose Medicaid coverage, right? So talking about losses in the tens of millions of people being able to access any kind of healthcare, right? The benefits will overwhelmingly accrue to the rich. If you're in the top 0.1% of earners, you stand to gain roughly $400,000 per year in tax benefits. If you're earning $4 million a year, you're going to have an extra $400,000 in your pocket because of this bill. Americans making less than $17,000 a year are going to be about $1,000 a year worse off.
Is that's taking into account some of the other benefits they lose, not necessarily their tax return?
So yeah, their tax, they might get a little bit of a tax cut, but if they're having to pay for all these programs, like if they lose healthcare, if they lose all access to all of these benefits, they're going to be worse off, right?
Yeah.
And that's quantified in that $1,000 a year figure.
Hell.
The bill is going to add at least $3.8 trillion worth of debt spending over the next 10 years. And yeah, basically, who's going to collect on those higher interest rates that the government's paying? Remember, I talked about bonds and lending the government money. If the interest rate goes up, the people that most benefit out of that are people who own bonds. Well, who owns bonds? Rich people. And 70% of those are typically Americans. And obviously, they're wealthy because they own investment vehicles. So what we're seeing is a mass in this bill, which has got tax cuts, it's got cuts to spending, Medicaid, food stamps, all terrible shit. And the beneficiaries of that are going to be the wealthiest, 0.1% of Americans. It's just the cruelest, nastiest, most disgusting piece of legislation I've ever seen. Like it really is just like an absolute thermonuclear bomb going off for the lower class in the United States, right? Like,
don't forget all the anti-trans stuff as well that's tied in with it.
Oh, I haven't. Don't worry.
Oh.
So, so there's a provision in the bill. So, quote, a provision that prohibits Medicaid and CHIP, Children's Health Insurance Program, funding for puberty blockers, gender-affirming hormone therapy, and gender-affirming surgeries for trans people of all ages. Although the original provision only prohibited coverage for minors, Republicans adopted a manager's amendment that broadened this provision to ban coverage for trans people of all ages. And then there's another quote, a provision that amends the Affordable Care Act to prohibit items and services furnished for a, quote, gender transition procedure, unquote, including puberty blockers, gender-affirming hormone therapy, and gender-affirming surgeries from being covered as an essential health benefit. So what that means is the government won't pay for any gender-affirming care, right, in the form of Medicare or Medicaid. But if you listen carefully to that second part about the Affordable Care Act, it means that, you know, Obamacare and any private health insurance plan offered via the Obamacare exchanges is now prevented from covering gender-affirming healthcare for human beings of all ages. So if you have, you a person, have your own private insurance, but you got that insurance through Obamacare, through the Affordable Care Act, that insurance that you pay for now is prohibited from covering gender-affirming care.
Yeah, it now
and
does
not just for children, for adults, anyone, anywhere, unless you're on multi-platinum insurance, right? That doesn't touch Obamacare. That's just a normal private insurance scheme that doesn't go through the Affordable Care Act, which obviously most people can't afford. Gender-affirming care just like doesn't exist now for the majority of Americans based on this change.
It's insane. It's insane. What is their obsession with this? I frankly do not understand it. That this is such a priority. Also, I think they need to look up maybe how wide the definition of gender-affirming care is. Because I think all these fucking conservatives getting hair plugs and like Botoxing their faces or having their jaws.
Oh, Elon Musk for getting his jaw filled out and getting his weird fucking pecs put in and getting he's got all his hair back, and that's definitely gender-affirming.
All that sort of stuff. Yeah, making you feel all like manly and Johnny Bravo style. That's gender-affirming care, friend.
But also like some of those treatments, like puberty blockers, are used for purposes that are not gender-affirming care. If you have precocious puberty, where you start going through puberty too early, they give you puberty blockers. That's why those drugs were developed in the first place. And that's not, that's got nothing to do with like having a trans identity or anything like that. It's not gender-affirming care. That's just medical care, right? And so all of those people are now not going to have access to these treatments either through any of these plans. Yeah. And this covers to be clear, most people are covered by these insurances, either CHIP, whatever, Medicaid, Medicare, Obamacare insurance. That is like a huge swathe of the American electorate is covered by these insurances. So they're just trying to erase trans people as a thing, which is bad. That's the commentary part of it. That was the news part of it, and here's the commentary part. That's bad. That's
terrible.
Please don't try and, to just erase our trans brothers and sisters. Please don't do that.
So it's passed Congress. Has it passed the Senate?
It hasn't passed the Senate yet, but it is almost certainly going to, because they have a majority in both the House and the Senate, and they have the presidency in Donald Trump. And they've expressed a desire.
Majority.
Yeah. So Trump's OBBB, is almost certainly going to pass, and he's going to sign it, and the world is just going to be significantly worse off as a result.
Meanwhile, the Harvard University US government stoush has continued, and the Trump administration through Kristi Noem has basically said that Harvard would lose its ability to host foreign students.
So this has been challenged in the court. So there is an injunction on it at the moment. For
2 weeks, though.
Yeah, man. But the idea is basically in response to Harvard showing a bit of backbone and saying "fuck me, fuck you" to the Trump administration. The Trump administration has said "fuck me, fuck you," and basically decided to kneecap Harvard and prevent international students from enrolling, and obviously international students make up about a quarter of their student base. So
there's already a bunch of people enrolled. So basically they were saying that, if you want to go to school in the US, you have to get another school pretty much for a lot of the people that were already sort of
Kevin Rudd was tweeting about it. There's something like 116 Australian students currently there that need to okay, what the fuck do we do? Like my whole being here in the US is predicated on my study at Harvard. So it's just the reckless disregard. Like I know we've talked about it before, but just the cruelty is very much the point with this administration. This is the reason they do what they do is not because of any kind of plan. All these right wingers on YouTube going, Trump's trying to crash the economy so they can lower the bond yields and pay the debt back easier. And it's no, you fucking idiots, stop trying to galaxy brain this. There is no plan. He just wakes up with animus and concludes his day with animus. That's all he does, is he just takes big, hot, steamy shits all over people all day, every day, settles scores, fucks people over. That's all the American presidency is for the next 3.5 years at least, is just, attacking the wokerati or whatever, just drinking liberal tears. That's all it's going to be about. There is no plan. Oh, did you guys hear about the Biden thing? Did I put that in the rundown? The Biden book? I thought I did.
I thought you meant the cancer.
Biden's got cancer. Yeah, I was obviously hopes and prayers, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But
Trump immediately said he's much healthier than Biden. Isn't that great?
That was the response.
Thing to say when you find out that an old man's going to die. Anyway.
Just unreal. What a psychopath he is, honestly. Just an absolute A-grade fucking black tar heroin weapons grade narcissist. This fucking guy is. Anyway, there was this book that came out this week called Original Sin. And Jake Tapper, from the anchor from CNN, has been doing the rounds promoting it. He was one of the co-authors, which talks about Biden's infirmity coming up to the 2024 election and who knew what about it and all this sort of stuff. And I've been reading it, and it is incredible the amount of shit that's that was not disclosed to the American public about Biden's health and his lack of awareness in the lead up to the 2024 election, obviously, and the disastrous debate which we saw, which is when we and everyone else became aware of his
Wait, hang on. There was stuff we weren't seeing, because the running gag was, wow, Biden's out of it. Old man Biden.
They've been saying that for 1 year into his presidency. Everyone was turning around, pointing at gaffes. The Republicans were dining out on.
There was the public stuff, which they were making memes out of, and all the sort of stuff.
Going and shaking hands with people that just weren't there, and
see, the thing is, I hate to say it, this is one thing, and it may be only one thing on which the Republicans were actually correct. There were reports from as early as 2021.
Yeah,
Biden being a space cadet, not recognizing people, repeating himself, undertaking, and the thing that really surprised me, I'm reading this book now, is the extent to which his staff actually covered up for him. They would make accommodations or go, we'll give him a little news card at the start of the day that's got sort of the talking points and the big news. If he talks to any reporters or any of that sort of stuff, here's what you say, Joe, Sleepy Joe, here are the 3 dot points you need to hit, sort of thing. And that became basically them pre-scripting all of his interactions with everyone, because he was just woefully underprepared from 2021. People that he would see, he would have good days and bad days, but just the proportion of bad days increased as they moved on from, as early as 2021. And, to the extent to which there was this big George Clooney fundraiser at the start of 2024, end of 2023, something like that, where he didn't recognize George Clooney. There are people in his life that he didn't. George Clooney is a mega donor for the Democratic Party. He's known him for 2 decades. He's one of the most recognizable actors on earth.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's also fucking George Clooney.
He's also George Clooney.
Yeah. He
didn't recognize him. And he was shaking hands going, oh, thanks very much for coming. And the aide goes, this is George. You remember George? And he goes, oh, yeah, thanks very much for coming. He goes, George Clooney. Oh, yeah, thanks very much. The extent to which Biden was not just asleep at the wheel, but there's this whole, they called them the Politburo, this kind of like council of people around him, his aides and advisors, who are basically running the country for the last two and a half years of his presidency, is genuinely shocking. And
this is what the Republicans were saying.
That's what they were saying.
Very loudly.
Yeah.
Like, what's the lady?
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard was like saying that, one of her main points in several interviews was that there was the Democratic elite running the show around Biden, which
it sounds
is
conspiratorial.
very strong language.
But is also based on the evidence that I've just read from over 200 interviews that Jake Tapper has done, actually seems completely correct.
But I mean, that's also what government is. Right, is that you have a head of state with people he appoints, and they are the ones that are effectively running things. The president just signs off on it.
Sure, but that's the important part, though, Adam, is that the president, being of sound mind, sees, hears, and understands what's being done and signs off on it. And that part was not happening. Basically, one of his advisors, whose name escapes me now, was running domestic policy. It's not like, he was going, oh, what do you think we should do about, this Build Back Better bill? Like, how should we handle it? He was like running it with this is why the progressives had so much access during the Biden presidency and why they got so much of their domestic agenda through as part of the Build Back Better bill didn't succeed, but they got it through in the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of all this, industrial policy and things like that, and sort of subsidies for whatever, green energy, all this sort of stuff, and the CHIPS Act was really because Biden was not running domestic policy. He was focused on foreign policy, which of the things in the Biden oeuvre administration, I would argue the foreign policy was the worst shit that he did. His policy on, pulling out of Afghanistan, his policy on Gaza, his failed policy on the Ukraine war, like all of the stuff that he was directly focused on was the shit that went the worst. The stuff that he didn't touch and other people were running entirely was the stuff that was the only things that went well as part of the Biden agenda. Like it is shocking to me. I've definitely been.
Were you didn't you? I mean, I did think that there was some.
Up until the debate, I was like, oh, yeah, look, he's old, but the Republicans are blowing it out of proportion. And I think I said on debate night, I watched the debate and I texted you guys 5 minutes in. I was like, he's done. He's cooked. He's lost it. Like, it's like he's had a stroke or something. Like, the man is mentally not all there. 4 of his cabinet secretaries have come out and spoken, have been interviewed for this book, all of them saying, we didn't see him for the last year of his presidency. His cabinet, we had no fucking idea what was happening. His aides were just running this little tight ring around him. He wasn't doing any kind of public speaking. If he was doing public speaking, it was all done with teleprompters and notes. It was all pre-written for him. He was even doing pre-written statements to cabinet, to his own cabinet. That's how tightly controlled that they had to make anything that Biden said and did, because he was a fucking mess. He couldn't put together a coherent sentence towards the end of his presidency. One of his close aides literally said something to the fact of after the debate, they were felt sorry for him because it's this guy can't put a fucking sentence together. That was the quote. That's one of his aides.
Fucking hell.
Yeah, the whole thing is just a complete fucking mess. I know it's not in the rundown, but just
why would you keep that up for so long?
For so long.
You swap. That's what the vice president's fucking for.
Well, this is what they're saying though. Is the Republicans? They're like, this is the woke agenda at play. You've just this is what the Republicans have been saying.
But no wonder when the Democratic Party is telling people to ignore their lying eyes after the debate, and they kept that up for nearly a month, where they were just going, he's better than ever. He's fine. He's fine. I've been in the. He had a cold. It's his stutter. I said, I hope I don't get that cold because I'll be fucking brain dead. It's just, of course, trust with the Democratic Party is at all-time lows because the American people saw that and they were like, oh, I can see, I had, what it honestly reminded me of was the way it was, my father died several years ago. And in the last couple of years of his life, he had cancer of various sorts and it metastasized. And one of the cancers that he had to deal with was a brain cancer. And there were some very awkward discussions in the last couple of years of his life where we had to say, hey, Dad, you can't be in charge of spending money and stuff. Or he was talking about investing money or moving money around in a very addled state. And we had to have some very awkward conversations with him, be like, hey, you need to give us your passwords to things. You can't be spending money. Like at a certain point, he was driving past a certain point that I felt was safe. And it's very hard to have those discussions with someone who's adult. Obviously, like there's also the slice, it happens slice by slice. So people would see Biden a year and then a year later would go, oh, fuck, he's really deteriorated. But the people who are with him every day just kind of go, oh, well, he has good days and his bad days and he just kind of like gets better and worse. But like at the heart of it was just the fact that there was this guy who was a completely arrogant and had such an addled brain that he couldn't see how addled he was. In order to be able to make the decision to pull himself out. And because he was so arrogant, he just says, oh, I'm the only one who's beat Trump. I'm the only one who can do it. I'm the one who has to do it. Despite the fact that there was all of this evidence to the contrary, it's like it's awkward to have a conversation with your dad or your boss, being the president, to be like, give me your keys. You can't do this anymore. Because I tell you what, from first-hand experience, they don't respond well to that conversation.
No.
Right?
No. Well, accepting that your own... Yeah, like accepting that your own cognition is flawed. Is the most terrifying thing I can think of.
It's horrifying.
It'd be horrible to confront.
So I totally understand how it sort of happened, but the fact that, it was the lying about it, and they thought, oh, Trump's such an existential threat. Anything that we do to hurt Biden's only going to help Trump. So there was this kind of like pathological aspect to the whole thing where they were kind of like, they were in denial. They were fooling themselves.
They just left it too late.
And they left it way too late. And then we all saw it on the debate night and it was bare for everyone to see. And even then some in his inner circle were like, oh, it's not so bad. We can recover from this. We just got to spin it. And so they wasted another 3.5 weeks from that point before him stepping down from the race.
They waited to the polling. The polling came in and they went, well, we can't ignore this.
The polling was there. All of the people in the administration, they were dealing with polling. They dealt with pollsters. Okay, there's this pollster that he dealt with for 30 years. And they just like, they said, Biden's decided he's running again for a second term. And the pollster was like, oh, but like, do you guys like have a discussion about this? Or like, because I've got some numbers which say the American people are not on board with that he's too old, that they don't have faith in his ability to do another term. And they're just like, nope. He's the candidate. He decides whether he's running or not. Like, get on board or get the fuck out, basically. So they knew. This is a Bain guy from Bain, like he had fucking consultant brain. And he was like, oh, but look at this word cloud, which says old man at the center of it. And they're like, not interested. So they had the data early on that this guy was not going to be competitive in a race against Donald Trump, but specifically because of the concerns that American voters had about his infirmity, and they plowed through it and they did it anyway. Yeah. That's what's shocking to me is the lying and the construction of this like reality distortion field around him in order to facilitate something that was like obviously bad. And that's why we have Trump now. That's why we've got the big beautiful bill, because like Ron Klain couldn't fucking handle the fact that his boss was obviously losing his mind and he had a $4 million paycheck riding on the campaign. So he's like, let's fucking go, baby. Like, let's ride this into the ground. Let's fucking...
I mean, probably like most presidencies have had like a circle of people hiding the craziest shit. Like I remember hearing about just how drunk Nixon was all the time.
Sure.
And all this sort of stuff.
And JFK had lots of medical issues, Addison's disease and all that sort of stuff, which he kept from the public. FDR died in office. He had lots of different health issues. He could barely stand up, for a good portion of his presidency. He was so, had all these issues to deal with. So, yes, it does happen, but you would think in the modern era that they just hid him away. Like even in 2020, they were talking about the campaign was advantageous to Biden because he could literally just sit in his basement and do Zoom calls all day rather than having to go and be out in the field and do long days.
Oh, you mean the COVID.
During COVID,
pandemic,
during the 2020 campaign. Yeah, that's basically the only reason he won is because his impairment wasn't an issue in campaigning in that environment. And basically he just like, by the time this latest campaign ran, it was like going to sleep. He was having dinner at 4:30. Like my toddler has dinner at 5. You know what I mean? Like he was not doing any. He did like half a dozen night events over the course of a year. You know, like he was literally like, grandpa has to go to bed because he physically can't do like early morning, late nights anymore. Like that's not someone it's not even compatible with, it's not only compatible with running for the presidency, it's actually not compatible with performing the job of president.
We've got to fucking stop electing the oldest people alive
don't get me
into
started.
these jobs.
Yes,
like,
I agree.
fucking hell.
Yeah, just unreal.
Right.
This, you know, like
need.
Dianne Feinstein, like, you know, Mitch McConnell literally having fucking glitches in the Matrix in front of fucking cameras. You know, like, stop electing octogenarians. Like, old people need to be represented. That's
Let
fine.
them rest.
But let him sit.
Rest.
He's in his 80s.
They've earned it.
Let him sit. You know, like, let another stop being so arrogant to assume that you're the only person that can perform this job in your 80s. You don't know how to convert a PDF. Like, you probably actually don't know what the fuck is going on out in the world of technology and other areas of legislation. Let someone younger take over. Thank you.
Anyway, final story for today, which we'll do very quickly, was North Korea. Always good for a laugh. Always good for a lol. I know. They've been building some ships, though. They've been, obviously, the missiles were the big thing, and the space program, and that was, they're on ships now. That's the new thing.
Nice.
So they built one new destroyer or frigate or whatever it is, and they had a second one. The concept is that they're going to put the missiles that they were showing off, 5 years ago. They're going to go on the ships, and the ships will then shoot them. Anyway, point being is they launched the second ship. Anyway, didn't go so well. It's one of those ship launchings where it sort of slides down the ramp
and just falls out sideways.
And it kind of just did, like a 180 and flipped, and then is now partially submerged in the port in which it was being launched. The best part about it is that they tried to cover it up from the American satellites by just putting a lot of blue tarps over it.
Yep,
I was going to say, it looks like they threw a tarp over it, which, it's great for a share house rental inspection, not so good when your 5,000-ton warship just kind of keels over.
Yeah, that'll definitely fool fucking OpenAI's latest image recognition technology as a fucking tarp.
Like, is this a ship or is it a tarp? Is it the ocean? No one can tell.
Yeah, you say I'm going to see it in my capture when I next log into Gmail, like to select all the images with a North Korean submerged ship in it. Yeah.
Is it a boat or a tarp?
I was more imagining like just really fast-paced, like generals walking from room to room, just being like, Mr. President, we've got reports of a 5,000 square foot tarp in North Korea. And then just like, dear God, get the Pentagon on the phone.
It's unclear whether it's
and
one
Biden
big
says,
tarp or whether it's like...
Who are you?
It's unclear whether it's one big tarp or whether it's like lots of little tarps they've stitched together.
These are the important questions.
These are the... Like, I want to know the logistics of the tarp operation. Anyway, Kim Jong-un has weirdly publicly, said that it's a, well, I don't know can't remember his exact words, but he's very, 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 very angry.
The quote here is quite scary when you remember it's coming from Kim Jong-un, is that he described the incident as a, quote, serious accident and criminal act caused by absolute carelessness, irresponsibility, and unscientific empiricism.
Sounds real smart.
Yeah, someone's gonna die.
Yeah.
That'll whip up the bass.
Hey, ChatGPT, make me sound super smart. Acting like a language douche expert. So yeah, I mean that's obviously not great. And presumably the person or people responsible for that situation are probably going to be being visited by the pointy end of a anti-aircraft missile.
Squad.
Yeah. What does it mean for North Korean kind of naval expansion?
I guess they've still only got one destroyer.
They've got one destroyer. They've got another one. They'll build a few more.
Yeah, they had one destroyer. They were going to have two destroyers. They still only have one destroyer.
But they destroyed the destroyer.
Yeah.
North Korean Navy traditionally has been sort of much smaller, fast attack boats. So these are the first big not capital ships, but the first big ships they've built,
Flagships,
either in many years or ever, if you will, covered in tarps. It's funny that they've even admitted.
Well,
that it
yeah,
happened.
they've got a good a quote from a Navy expert.
A big ship in the bay is kind of hard to do. Hard to deny the evidence of your eyes.
There's nothing there, George. It's just a big tarp. There's
what are you talking about? It's just a giant tarp that's come to destroy us all.
Yeah, they've got a quote here from a Navy expert from Hanyang University in Seoul, to say that the reason why North Korea disclosed the incident is it wants to show it's speeding up the modernization of its Navy forces. So they're acknowledging it because the fact that they built a destroyer hopefully makes them look cool. Yes, it fell into the sea. Yes, we've covered it in a tarp. But we built one. My
destroyer who lives in Canada. Bro, you should see this totally awesome destroyer I have. I totally have one.
Yeah, a second North Korean destroyer at this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely in the dock. Yes. May I see it? No.
No. On that note, we are, and we always will be Unnatural Selection. Make sure you visit us at our salubrious home on the web, unnaturalshow.com. Make sure you follow us on all the bullshit social medias that have, do, or ever will exist at our handle at Unnatural Show. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and mother flipping TikTok. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at George Tsipos.
You can follow me on Instagram and Threads at at Tom.Heath.
And you can follow me to bed because that's where I'm going right now.
Oh, hello.
Don't need to ask me twice. Thanks for listening, guys.
Your wife's not listening.
Thanks for listening, guys. I love your faces. We'll see you next week. Wink.
It's just me and the cat hanging out.
Nice.
In the bed, on the bed, around the bed.
Yep. In and around the bed.
There's a bed involved.
Yep.
I have a joke in my head and I shouldn't say it. Thanks for listening, guys. Love your faces. We'll see you next week. Bye.